I work at Bill Grady's all-night gas and shop off the Erawan County Loop Road. For those unfamiliar with America's most isolated county, Erawan is a large-ish island, more than 100 miles out to sea from Baltimore. The Loop Road makes a circle around the island and connects most of the major towns. The station is located about halfway between Mudsark and Jerusalem. If you know the area, then you know how isolated it is, which is why I took the job. I always fancied trying my hand at writing a novel and working way out there with no civilization larger than a trailer park or a farmhouse for 15 miles in either direction. And well, long story short, that struck me as a good way to make some money while having free time to tackle this project. Despite that, I assure you this isn't fiction. I wish I was creative enough to make something this strange up. First things first, my name is David. It's not, but I'd rather stay anonymous. And I've only had this job for about 2 weeks. The last guy to hold the job was a kid who helped train me for 2 days, then shipped out. He was joining the Air Force, and I was hired really quickly to fill the vacuum he would be leaving. To my understanding, he kind of sprung it on the owner out of the blue. Anyway, he seemed kind of nervous those 2 nights, but I chalked it up to his being about to leave for basic training, and thought nothing of it. I had been there myself 1 week exactly, and had already fallen into a rhythm. The night shift only had a handful of customers, and I spent most of my time writing or smoking, at a safe distance from the pumps, obviously. When this trucker came in, probably early 20s, pale-skinned and dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt with its sleeves rolled up, and a pack of cigarettes in one of the cuffs. The way you see in old war movies, if you need a visual aid. He looked around for a few minutes before walking up to the counter with a bottle of Coke and a pack of pork rinds. He stood looking over my shoulder at the rack of cigarettes and vapes behind me, checking for his brand, I assume. Then asked for a pack of Lucky Strike hundreds. He had this odd, kinda cold-sounding voice. That's not a good description, but it's the best I've got. It wasn't an accent, really, just a cadence and tone that made me wonder if he was on something. I didn't care either way and rang him up. He paid cash, and then he asked me a question. "Do you know if Kelly's Diner is open this late?" I had never heard of such a place, and told him. He gave me a confused look before shrugging and walking out of the shop. If that had been the last of it, I'd have forgotten. But ever since, I've been hearing more and more weird remarks about a town that I know doesn't exist. The second event came a day later, when an old guy in a suit pulled up outside in an antique black car that I guessed to be from sometime around World War II. Give or take probably 10 years on either side. I'm not really into cars. And he was wearing a suit to match. It was black and formal like you'd wear to a funeral, and matched some old suits my granddad used to wear. He was visibly confused, and I wondered if he was senile, which seemed confirmed when he opened his mouth. He had this odd old-timey way of talking, and it stuck with me. He said, "Now I feel like a right fool asking you, boy, but how do I get to Winewater Springs from here? I've gone and gotten my fool self lost, it seems." I'd never heard of the place, so I asked him some questions trying to get a handle on where it could be, or what it even was, as I wasn't sure if it was a town or a natural feature with that name. He told me it was a town, located along this stretch of highway between Mudsark and Jerusalem. He swore he must have missed the turnoff in the fog, but couldn't orient himself. I told him kindly that there was no such town, and asked if there was anyone I could call for him. But he just looked at me with a really odd expression before walking back out into the misty night air. I should have done something probably, but what? Call the sheriff's office and report an old guy said something strange? Nah, dude, not me. By the third time, I was almost expecting it. This lady with big poofy hair came in wearing a bright pink jacket over fairly mundane clothes. She smiled widely, and in a voice I can only describe as ditzy, asked me how far she had to drive before coming to the turnoff for Winewater Springs. At this point, I was starting to suspect a prank. I had lived on the island for my entire life and knew exactly how many towns there were in the county. I knew all their names, and I knew someone from pretty much all of them. Like I said, Erawan is a small place, and I knew for an absolutely certain fact that there was no such town. So I decided to play along with whatever prank or hazing ritual this was. I asked her the same sort of "describe where it is" questions I had asked the old man, and she was a little clearer than him in her answers. The conversation went like this. Me: do you know how far the turnoff is from Jerusalem? Her: like 20 miles? To be clear, that would place this town about 2 or 3 miles north of the gas station, in the middle of what I knew to be a cornfield. Me: is there a sign? Her: yeah, I mean there's that green sign next to the highway, and a wooden one closer to town. Me: how big is the town? Her: like, I don't know about the size of Whisper Bay. For those unaware, that's the next town south of Jerusalem with about 2,000 people in it. Me: when was the last time you went there? Her: this morning. I live there. The questioning continued like this for a few minutes, but didn't lead anywhere productive. I had neither been able to figure out where she was looking for or get her to break character in whatever joke this was, so finally I told her I couldn't help her, and she left in a sulk. Just to prove I wasn't going crazy, I drove the entire length of the road between work and Mudsark the next day, slowly and going both directions looking for anything that might say Winewater Springs. Nothing. Nada. Zilch. Not even the hint of a sign or road ever having been there, let alone existing today. The next night, nobody came in, asking about anything weird. Well, there was a weird dude, a priest with the robe and white collar wearing sunglasses inside, at night, when it was overcast. But that guy is only memorable because he had a bad vibe, so to speak. Nothing he said was weird. So I thought maybe the joke, or whatever it was over. But the night after that, 2 people asked for help finding things I'd never heard of. One gave me the name of a hotel that I didn't know, and when asked, said it was in Winewater Springs. I gave them directions to Gilman's bed and breakfast in Jerusalem, instead of saying I hadn't heard of what they were looking for. They thanked me and left. Then, not 20 minutes later, another guy walked in dressed wildly inappropriately for this time of year, wearing shorts and a t-shirt when it was cold and rainy, like always around here, outside. He looked behind me at the rack of smokes and, squinting, asked if we sold Diamond and Callaway brand cigarettes. I had never heard of that brand in my life, but just told him we didn't sell them. He shrugged and left, but I swear he muttered something about knowing the gas station in Winewater Springs had them as he left. I've also noticed that the radio in my car seems to get odd static sometimes, around where the supposed turnoff should be. I'm sure it's just a coincidence, but it's all adding up to leave me really confused. There's a lot of creepy stuff on this island. We're cold, foggy, and isolated, and that breeds superstition and folklore. Ghost stories and cryptids are probably thicker on the ground here than anywhere else in the country. But I've asked around among my friends, and nobody has ever heard a legend about a missing town or anything else that could explain this. But one day, I was driving to Port Erawan on my day off to see a movie, and decided to take a weird route. North through Mudsark, then back south on back roads by Dutch Hollow. I did this for one reason, and one reason only. I won't disguise that fact. I was still hoping to find some evidence of a community just north of the gas station. I found it just at the end of the trees, where the cornfields begin, curving back into the woods. The road was overgrown and looked more like a maintenance trail for a power line, but even still, I'm convinced it hadn't been there before. I've been driving this route my whole life. I would have noticed it, right? Maybe not. I don't know. I got out of my car to look around, and sure enough, there was a green turnoff sign next to it, face down in the ditch, covered in mud, mind you. But it existed. So I got back in my car and turned down the old trail. I knew there wasn't a town down here, but the sign had read, Winewater Springs. I think once I lifted it up, only about a third was legible. The path was so overgrown, and my car was far from an off-road vehicle that it took perhaps half an hour to go a mile down the track. But then the road started to improve, turning at first to clear dirt, then soon to gravel, and finally to asphalt. It appeared to be in better condition than most roads in the county, and I wondered what it was doing out here, unfinished. I didn't have long to wonder, however, as I soon reached a small parking lot. Beyond it, the hillside had been blasted away to a flat cliff, and two large metal doors were embedded in it. It looked like a hangar for an airplane, but there was no runway to provide an explanation. I parked at the entrance to the parking lot, in the middle of the road. Next to it was a sign made of carved whitewashed wood that read in a retro font, Welcome to Winewater Springs. And below that, in cursive, the words, A dandy place to live. The cheesy 1950s styling of the sign and the cold metal of the doors were at odds, and yet somehow complementary, like a sports car and a pickup, both made by the same company. Some subtle quality remained that left them familiar to each other on first glance. Erowin does have some old bunkers and forts. It's so far from anything worth nuking that it was considered for a continuity of government site, or so local legend goes, with explanations of why other places on the mainland had been chosen instead, ranging from locals not liking it to the water table being too high, and about a dozen other stories, changing with the teller and sometimes with the telling. Something you should understand about us out on this rock is that we have very little to do, so we have developed a strong tradition of storytelling and folklore. At least that's what I want to believe. Could just be that we're assholes who like scaring our girlfriends with ghost stories. Either way, I had heard stories about bunkers, even seen a few on school trips. There was one in Port Erawan under the courthouse that we toured in the 7th grade. But I'm rambling because I don't really want to explain the rest of what happened. I got out of my car and slowly walked across the parking lot. The door looked like something from the 50s, but it also looked new. It was so clean and unrusted, unheard of on this rain-sodden island, that I expected a security guard to appear at any moment and ask me what I was doing. The door was hanging just slightly ajar, and no sound could be heard anywhere around. I didn't realize at the time, at least not with my head. But even the birds had fallen silent, I think. I peeked my head through the door and saw a tunnel sloping down with bright light spilling up at the bottom. For some reason that I'm not entirely sure now, I felt I needed to go in. I think I did anyway, frankly. I'm not convinced I didn't hallucinate everything after I turned off that road. And I hope I did. Being crazy would be easier to rationalize than what I saw in there. My feet echoed on the smooth stone floor as I wandered down, the light growing brighter as I went. What I found at the bottom is, well, it's hard to describe, not because it was so out of the ordinary you can't imagine it, but because of how weirdly normal, almost artificially so, it was, except for its location. The best way I can describe the vibe of what I saw is to compare it to Main Street, USA at Disney World, but even higher quality. The tunnel led out onto a street of paved blacktop, raised sidewalks next to it, with facades of brick and stone and wood on either side. It looked like the main street of any small town in America, idyllic but instantly familiar. Flags hung from light poles and bunting-lined windows as I slowly walked through the echoing cavern. Above me, the ceiling was rough stone, but painted a bright robin's egg blue with fluffy white clouds drawn on by some artist with a scaffold. The buildings themselves were as clean as if they had been built yesterday, but all had that subtle patina of age that makes old buildings special. The air smelled of nothing, not even the normal rock smell of a cave. As silently as though I were in church, I walked with slow footsteps to the sidewalk and then up to the window of a storefront. The text, Main Street Drugstore, was emblazoned across the glass, and looking through, I could see shelves of merchandise and a long bar counter running one side of the room. A sign hung over it advertising ice cream 7 flavors, and a chalkboard behind the counter listed prices with nothing costing more than 20 cents. What was this place? I wondered at the time, though in hindsight not as strongly as I should have. Across the street, I found a barber shop, its striped pole slowly spinning outside its door, trying the handle. I found it unlocked and stepped inside. It was a perfect recreation of a 1950s barber shop, as near as I could tell. Though I admit any inaccuracies would probably slip past me unnoticed if they were not too far out of pocket for the time period. I wandered back out into the street and followed it to an intersection, the tunnel splitting in a 4-way cross. The buildings still lined every bit of their walls, ending at the stone roof of the cavern. Glancing around, I saw the left path narrow, slightly, with the roof lowering from 3 or 4 stories high to only about 1.5, perhaps 2 at the most. Slowly, I made my way that way and found houses, ranch styles, and a few split levels built like the Main Street buildings as facades into the sides of the rock. Walking into one, I found it furnished and clean, lacking any trace of dust or age, with a pantry still stocked and a refrigerator still cold. It was as if someone were already living here. And they probably were, I told myself with a shake. I had allowed the shock of finding this place to hypnotize me into a lack of judgment, but clearly I had broken into someone's lived-in home, and they could be back any moment. More clearly now, I wondered what this place was. People clearly lived here, as some had come to my gas station. But where were they? Why build all of this and maintain it? Who had paid for it? These were all questions that seemed important to me in that moment. Walking faster now, but still trying to be quiet, I walked back towards the intersection. I reached it in about half the time it had taken me to find the house, and I was just turning to leave when I heard a faint sound from a brick building farther up the street, away from where I had come in. It may sound insane. Hell, it does sound insane. But if you are judging me, so am I. Believe it. I felt at that instant that I needed to find the source of the sound. I realized then that other than footsteps and my own breathing, that faint noise was it music. Was the only thing I had heard since turning off my car. As I got closer, it was clear to me that it was indeed music. The sounds of children singing the national anthem were drifting from what I saw now was a 2-story brick schoolhouse. The words, Memorial School, are carved above the door. As I stepped through its front door, the sound of singing grew louder, and for the first time since entering this weird simulacrum of the 1950s, I smelled something. A faint, acrid chemical tang that I could not place, only noticeable because of how little smell anything else in this place had. I followed the sound up the stairs. They creaked faintly underneath my feet, but I kept going. When I reached the door to a classroom labeled 207, I could tell that the sound was coming from just on the other side. And slowly, I reached out to turn the handle. It was unlocked as all the other doors had been, and swung open with a faint creak. Inside was an empty room. Fear and disappointment rushed through me in equal measure as I stared around the room, looking for the source of the singing. A fairly typical classroom. Posters depicting things relevant to the subjects at hand lined the walls, and colorful paper shapes like stars and snowflakes were tacked to the walls. I slowly scanned the room, turning in a circle And finally, I found it, the source of the noise. A lone record player sat on the teacher's desk, spinning as it belted out the final lines of the anthem. The childlike voices, already not great singers, rendered ethereal by the scratchy recording. Slowly, I reached out with my hand to raise the needle from the record and restore the funeral-esque silence of this place. But the instant my fingers lifted the arm from the vinyl, everything was engulfed in a pure, unpierced darkness. For a moment I was in panic, underground, as I was. It was not only dark, it was fully and truly lacking in light. Not darkness, but blindness. And my other senses were already compensating. I could hear the faint creaking of the building, smell that same chemical smell stronger now, and mixed with the smells of mold and damp. Then my senses started to return to me, and I fished my phone from my pocket, turning on its flashlight setting. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, but when they did, I screamed with terror. The light had played across the desks as I turned it on, but they were no longer devoid of students. The room had changed. Paint peeled from the walls, and the posters were yellowed and curled by moisture. But I didn't notice any of that, though I remember it now, so some part of me must have logged it. All I could see was the skeletal remains propped in each of the chairs, partially mummified and seeming to watch me with their dead, empty eyes. Bodies twisted oddly with hands over mouths and heads under tables. I backed up, breathing heavily until my legs collided with the teacher's desk, and spinning in fear, I saw him too, frozen forever as if grabbing at his throat. His empty, rotted eyes stared questioningly into my soul, asking why I had dared disturb his rest. And I ran, headlong down the stairs, light flashing around wildly and out onto the street. More were dead on the street, twisted or captured in the midst of some last heroic act. All these signs and more were implied by the poses I saw, but I didn't care for their story, only for my escape. I ran, feet slamming into the ground like jackhammers as I reached the end of the town. Here, the road curved back up to the surface. I stopped for a moment to catch my breath, and playing the light around the space, saw something I had missed before. Above the exit tunnel, in faded and peeling paint, was a faint, grinning yellow smiley face. "Have a nice day," forever left underneath, its unblinking eyes a silent witness to whatever unknown horror had happened here. And then I was off again, running up the sloping path and out through the crack in the doors. My legs were burning, but I shot across the parking lot and threw myself into my car. But something was wrong. I hadn't run across a parking lot. I had run across grass, dotted with low shrubs, and my car, where I had parked it beside the wooden sign on the access road, was now sitting on a simple dirt track, overgrown and hard to see as it snaked into the woods. I stared in disbelief at the hillside where the doors had been, and saw only stone, blasted clearly, at some point far in the past, eroded back to something almost natural. But that was all. No entrance tunnel or cave. This place had the look of an abandoned construction site now. There were signs of rock having been blasted and not cleared. Some rusted things that might have been equipment lay strewn about this empty lot. But nothing remained of the town that I had just left, and its scene, of its mass death and massacre. I somehow made it home, though I don't remember much about that trip, just that it was getting dark by the time I made it to the road an hour later. I checked my watch and saw that somehow I had spent 12 hours in that place, if it ever even existed at all. Most people assume my job is simple. I service ATMs, refill them, run some maintenance checks, and make sure they don't get jammed. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. At least, that's what I thought when I started. Sounds easy, right? But if it's so easy, Then explain why, for the past 6 months, I've been living with a fear I can't shake. Explain why I hesitate every time I step up to a machine, why I feel something lurking just beyond my sight. Explain why, even when I'm alone, I hear faint whispers when I close my eyes, whispers that seem to come from behind the ATM screen. I followed the rules, every single one, never questioned them, never broke them. But somehow, it wasn't enough. And I still ended up here. And now, no matter how hard I try, I can't unsee the things I've seen. I wasn't desperate for a job, but when I saw the listing, I figured why not? The pay was solid, the hours were flexible, and honestly, it seemed like one of those jobs where you could zone out and just get through the shift. It seemed easy, straightforward. No long hours, no stressful deadlines, just a simple task with a decent paycheck. No customers breathing down your neck, no supervisors micromanaging you. Just me, the machines, and the routine. Easy money. But looking back, I should have questioned why a job like that paid so well. The man who hired me, Mr. Garrison, looked like he hadn't slept in years. He was thin, almost sickly, with hollow cheeks and dark circles under his eyes, so deep they made him look bruised. When he first shook my hand, his grip was cold, his fingers stiff like he didn't use them much. I figured he was just exhausted, maybe burned out from too many long nights. But there was something else, something deeper in his eyes, an unease, like he was carrying a weight he couldn't put down, a kind of tiredness that wasn't just physical. "This isn't a normal job," he told me. His voice was low, serious, like he needed me to understand. This wasn't just a corporate warning about workplace safety. "There are rules. You'll need to follow them, no exceptions." Then he handed me a small, worn notebook. I flipped through it, expecting standard security protocols, what to do in case of a robbery, how to log transactions, maybe some maintenance tips. But instead, I found a list of rules that made no sense, rules that shouldn't have existed. And as I started reading the rules, a chill crept up my spine. It felt off, like the machine was alive, like it could see whatever I did. Rule number 1, when refilling the ATM, do not count the money by hand. The machine knows how much is needed. If you count, the numbers will not match what's in your head, and you will not like what happens next. Rule number 2, if the ATM screen flickers green twice in a row, stop what you're doing and turn around. Do not look at the screen again until the flickering stops. Rule number 3, every Tuesday at exactly 4:14 a.m., one of the ATMs will dispense a single $10 bill on its own. Do not take it. Do not touch it. It is not for you. Rule number 4, once a month, you will find a transaction receipt in the machine with no amount and no account number. Burn it. Do not throw it away. Do not keep it. Rule number 5, if the ATM asks you a question, do not answer. Step away and call Mr. Garrison immediately. Rule number 6, you may sometimes notice a customer standing at the ATM, staring at the screen without moving. Do not interact. Do not approach. They will leave when they are ready. Rule number 7, before you leave any ATM, make sure your reflection follows you. If it doesn't, shut your eyes and count to 10. When you open them, if your reflection is still missing, leave the area immediately and do not return until sunrise. I read the list twice, then a third time. I looked up at Mr. Garrison, waiting for the punchline, half expecting him to smirk and tell me it was some kind of weird initiation joke. But his face was like stone, his expression unwavering. "Follow them," he repeated, his voice flat. "No exceptions." I wanted to laugh, to tell him this was ridiculous, but something in his tone made my stomach twist. And so, I did what he told me. I followed the rules, every single one, At first, it felt ridiculous, like I was playing along with some elaborate prank. The job was exactly what I had expected: routine, predictable, almost boring. I worked mostly at night, driving from one ATM to the next, refilling cash, checking security cameras, and making sure everything was running smoothly. Routine stuff. Rule number 1 said, when refilling the ATM, do not count the money by hand. It wasn't rational, it wasn't smart, but I did it anyway. The rules were always in the back of my mind, but they felt like superstition, something weird and eerie, sure, but ultimately harmless. For the first couple of weeks, I even laughed at the rules in that notebook. Maybe Mr. Garrison was just messing with me. Maybe this was some elaborate test to see if I was the kind of guy who followed orders without question. But then, after about a month, things started to feel off. The first time I saw something strange, I told myself I was just tired. I had pulled up to an ATM in a quiet parking lot, the kind where the streetlights flicker and everything feels too still. There was a man standing at the machine, his back to me. Nothing unusual, except he wasn't moving, not typing, not reaching for cash, not even shifting his weight, just staring at the screen. His transaction should have been over long ago, but he didn't move. He just stood there, his eyes locked on the screen. No blinking, no shifting, nothing. I watched from a distance, waiting for him to finish up, but he never did. I waited a minute, then another. Something about him made my skin crawl. His posture was too stiff, like he wasn't actually standing but being held in place. Finally, I decided to check the security footage later, just to satisfy my growing unease, and left without a word. When I reviewed the cameras, my stomach dropped. He had been standing there for 4 hours, no movement, no sign of discomfort. And then, he was gone. Not walking away, no turning around, not leaving the frame. Just gone, as if he had never existed in the first place. The next warning came a week later. I found the blank receipt inside one of the machines, with no amount and no account number. My brain instantly flashed to the rules, and my body tensed. I knew what I had to do. But before I could grab my lighter, my fingers brushed against the paper. A jolt shot through me, sharp and freezing, like plunging my hand into ice water. My breath hitched as I yanked my hand back. For a split second, I swore the paper pulsed like it had a heartbeat. I burned the receipt that night, my hands unsteady as I watched the flames eat through the blank slip. The second it turned to ash, I heard something. A whisper, so faint, so distant, it could have been the wind. But the voice wasn't outside. It was right behind me, almost like it was coming from inside my own head. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't human. That was the moment I knew. The rules weren't a joke. 3 months in, the real horror started. It was a little past 4 a.m. on a Tuesday. I had just finished servicing an ATM in a dimly lit gas station parking lot. The only sound was the low hum of the streetlights and the distant chirping of crickets. Then I heard it. A soft whirring, followed by the unmistakable rustling of cash being dispensed. My stomach twisted. I knew what day it was. I knew what time it was. I turned back toward the machine, heart pounding. A single $10 bill sat in the slot. I went. Still. My breath hitched. Not for me. Not for me. I repeated to myself. I took a slow step backward, forcing my body to obey. Every nerve screamed at me to turn and run, but I knew the rules. I couldn't touch it. Couldn't even look at it for too long. My hands shook as I fumbled with my keys, trying to unlock my van without making a sound. Just as I slid into the driver's seat, a horrible thought crept into my mind. What happens to the money if no one takes it? I didn't want to know. I shouldn't have wanted to know, but something in me needed to look, just one glance. Curiosity won, and I checked the rearview mirror. And that's when I saw it. A hand, not an arm, not a person, just a hand, thin and pale, stretching out from the ATM slot. Its fingers curled around the bill, slow and deliberate, before pulling it back into the machine. My body moved before my brain did. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I slammed my foot on the gas and peeled out of the parking lot, my tires screeching against the asphalt. My hands were locked around the steering wheel, my knuckles white, my breathing ragged. I didn't look back. I didn't slow down. I didn't stop. And for the first time since I took this job, I wished I had never read the rules. After that night with the hand, I never let my guard down again. I followed every rule to the letter. No exceptions, no hesitation, never questioning why. I convinced myself that as long as I obeyed, I'd be safe. But it didn't matter. One night, I was servicing an ATM near the outskirts of town. It was one of those isolated locations, an old gas station with a flickering sign, barely any traffic, and nothing but empty roads stretching for miles in both directions. It was a quiet spot, just me, the machine, and the cold night air. I had done this stop plenty of times before, and nothing unusual had ever happened. I went through my routine, unlocked the machine, refilled the cash, and checked the security feed. Everything was normal. Then the screen flickered green. Once. Twice. My stomach dropped. The rule said, if the ATM screen flickers green twice in a row, stop what you're doing and turn around. Do not look at the screen again until the flickering stops. I turned my back immediately, my pulse pounding in my ears. My hands tightened into fists as I stood there, forcing myself to breathe slow, steady. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. I focused on the sound of my own breathing, refusing to listen for anything else. By the time I reached 10, the flickering stopped. I exhaled shakily, my muscles stiff from how tense I had been. My fingers trembled as I turned back toward the machine, ready to finish my work and get out of there. And then I saw. The words glowed on the ATM screen. Do you remember me? My blood turned ice cold. The rule. If the ATM asks you a question, do not answer. Step away and call Mr. Garrison immediately. I took a step back, my breath shallow, my body screaming at me to move, to leave. But the words didn't disappear. The screen stayed frozen, the question hanging there and waiting. It was more of a demand, rather than simply asking. I fumbled for my phone, my hand slick with sweat. My fingers barely worked as I dialed. Mr. Garrison picked up on the first ring. Where are you? His voice was sharp, urgent, like he already knew something was wrong. I told him, leave. Now don't hang up, just get in your car and drive. He insisted. I didn't hesitate. I spun on my heel, nearly tripping over myself as I rushed to my van. My heart was hammering so hard it hurt. I yanked the door open, jumped in, and started the engine, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles ached. As I threw the van into reverse, I made the mistake of looking back at the ATM one last time. The words had changed. Why did you leave? A cold shiver crawled up my spine. I didn't wait to find out what would happen next. I pressed the gas and sped down the empty road, the ATM shrinking in my mirror until it was nothing but a dark speck in the distance. Mr. Garrison was still on the line. Did it follow you? He asked. I didn't know what he meant. I didn't want to find out. Things only got worse after that. I tried to pretend everything was fine, that if I just kept my head down and followed the rules, I'd be okay. But something had changed. The air around me felt heavier, the nights quieter in a way that wasn't natural. And then I started noticing my reflection. At first it was subtle, something I could almost brush off as paranoia. The way my reflection moved in the ATM screens felt wrong. It copied my movements, but not quite right. Just a fraction of a second too slow, like it was thinking about what to do next. The first time I noticed it, I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the light. Maybe I was exhausted, reading too much into nothing. Then, one night, I was finishing up at a machine outside a closed convenience store. The street was empty. The only sounds were my own footsteps and the soft hum of the ATM. Routine. I locked up, turned toward my van, and reached for the door handle. Then, for no real reason, I glanced back at the ATM screen. Just a quick glance over my shoulder. My reflection was still there. My heart lurched. It should have moved with me. It should have followed. But there it was, standing frozen on the screen, facing forward while I stood turned away. And then it did something I know it shouldn't have done. It watched me. Not at the screen, at me. My reflection wasn't showing my back. It was facing me. I stopped breathing. My fingers dug into the van's door handle, my body locked in place. I knew the rule. Before you leave any ATM, make sure your reflection follows you. If it doesn't, shut your eyes and count to 10. When you open them, if your reflection is still missing, leave the area immediately and do not return until sunrise. Slowly, I shut my eyes. 1, 2, 3. My pulse hammered in my ears. I counted, my lips barely moving. 4, 5, 6. The urge to turn back, to see if it was still there, was almost unbearable. 7, 8, 9, 10. I opened my eyes. The screen was blank. That dreadful reflection was gone. It was just showing me. Normal. Human. Or at least, that's what it wanted me to believe. I got in the van and drove. I didn't look at another screen for the rest of the night. I don't even use mirrors anymore. Then, a few nights ago, everything changed. I pulled up to a machine, same as always. It was a quiet spot, a little too far from town for comfort, the kind of place where the wind howled through empty parking lots. I grabbed my tools and stepped toward the ATM. Before I even touched it, the screen lit up on its own. Words appeared. Bold. Unwavering. This is your last day. My mouth went dry. My fingers curled into fists. I don't know what that means. Last day on the job? Last day? Alive? A chill ran through me. I pulled out my phone and dialed Mr. Garrison. The call didn't go through. I tried again. Disconnected. One more time. No signal. Panic crept in. I drove to his office, pushing the speed limit the whole way. The building was dark. His office door was unlocked. Inside, his desk was cleared out. No papers. No personal items. Nothing. Like he had never been there at all. He was gone. No warning. No trace. No way to reach him. I had followed the rules. I never broke a single one. But I don't think it matters anymore. Because just now, I did something stupid. Something I shouldn't have done. I checked my reflection in the ATM screen, and this time, it didn't show my reflection at all. Not distorted, not smiling. Nothing. Like I wasn't there. Like I never had been. A hollow weight settled in my chest. I don't remember how I got inside my van. 1 second, I was staring at the empty ATM screen, my reflection nowhere to be found. The next, I was speeding down the road, my fingers locked around the steering wheel so tight they ached. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, my mind screaming at me to move. Move! Don't stop, don't think, just go. As I sped down the empty road, my phone buzzed in my lap. A new message from an unknown number. You forgot your reflection? My stomach dropped. A deep, icy cold spread through my chest, numbing everything but the raw, suffocating dread pooling in my gut. I slammed the brakes. The tires screeched against the pavement, my van jerking to a violent stop. My breath hitched as I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling so hard I nearly dropped it. Slowly, I lifted my gaze to the rearview mirror. My back seat was empty, but the reflection of the back seat wasn't. Something was sitting there. It looked exactly like me. Same uniform, same slumped posture, same exhausted eyes that had seen too much. But something was wrong. Its head was tilted, just slightly, like it was studying me. And it was smiling. A slow, knowing grin. I whipped around, heart slamming against my ribs. Nothing. The back seat was empty. I snapped my eyes back to the mirror. The reflection was still smiling,